Good afternoon. Welcome to the Energyst and Vattenfall's Power as a Service webinar, Preparing for Net Zero and Is Your Electrical Infrastructure Ready? The webinar is going to explore the transition to electrification that decarbonisation is going to bring about, and is starting to bring about already, and the implications for ownership, operations, maintenance and legal requirements for operating electrical infrastructure. So we're going to have a presentation here, and we're going to obviously set the scene with Andy Vickers from Vattenfall. But following that, we do want it to be a discussion. We want you to get involved and tell us what you think. There is a poll that we'll run throughout. There's 4 questions that we'd be very interested for you to answer as they come up. But also, any questions you have throughout the thing, just put it on the chat in the panel on the right-hand side. If you wish to raise your hand or ask a question verbally, as in out loud, I'm happy to hand over the mic and let you do that. Alternatively, put a question in the chat and I'll put it to the panel that we've got assembled. So initially, we've got Stuart Dawson, who's Managing Director of Vattenfall UK Networks, and we've got Andy Vickers from Vattenfall also. We've got a number of other experts from Vattenfall, and we'll introduce them as they come in. We've got also some interesting case studies with Thies van Driel, COO, and Simon Conker, co-founder of Managing Director of Bowers Electricals. And they will both give an opinion on how Power as a Service works for both being a partner of Vattenfall and being a customer. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Andy, who can explain a little bit more about Power as a Service and how it works.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for, as Tim mentioned, I'm Andy Vickers, and I'm one of the business development managers at Vattenfall Network Solutions. I'm going to spend probably 15-20 minutes talking over various aspects of the current net zero agenda, and how we're all trying to get there and what the options are around in terms of owning, operating, building out electrical infrastructure to meet the electrification revolution that's really about to happen around the globe. So let's kick off. So net zero is branded around everywhere at the moment. We all know that climate change is real. It's happening now, and that we have a very small window of opportunity to avert a climate disaster. Most industries and businesses are heavily reliant on fossil fuels and will need to make huge reductions in their emissions to get anywhere near the expected targets. For many businesses, the prospects of what actually needs to happen and the amount of work they need to do is utterly daunting, partly because many of the technical solutions are still in their infancy with no track record or clear leaders. So which one do you choose? There is little or no direction from government or from regulatory bodies, which is making it extremely hard for people at the moment. The timeframes to implement huge change are relatively short. The costs involved are prohibitively high, and the potential risks of getting it wrong are huge. There is, of course, the risk of doing nothing and being left behind. Businesses that don't reduce their emissions in line with industry targets will find themselves increasingly isolated. The good news, well, actually, there's plenty of good news. While some sectors are yet to fully define their long-term net zero journey, many businesses have clear sustainability strategies and are implementing these at pace. Things like energy efficiency, reducing their electricity consumption through smart lighting, smart buildings, conversion of existing heating and cooling to energy efficient systems. People are installing solar, wind, self-generation on site, battery storage and microgrid systems to become less reliant on the grid, but more importantly, to reduce their carbon footprint and to reduce their electricity costs. And of course, a lot of people today are transitioning their existing diesel fleets to electric. For most businesses, electrification is going to play a key role in their net zero journey. But what does this mean? Basically, it means that people are going to consume much more electrical energy as they convert existing fossil fuel, high emissions manufacturing, machinery and transport to electric. In some cases, we are seeing that businesses are looking at multiples of 5, 10, or even 20 times their existing consumption to enable them to go electric. This we're seeing in areas like ports and in bus depots. We all know that today's local grids and the national grid are far from ready for the massive hike in capacity that's going to be needed to enable the wholesale electrification of industry, transport and homes. We're told by the government and the regulators that capacity to meet the higher demand will be available within tomorrow's decentralized prosumer smart grids. But many people are worried. As a business, drastically increasing your electrical consumption means you're going to need to do a complete review of your electrical systems and your supply agreements. Very few businesses can do this themselves. You will need to determine things like, can your existing electrical infrastructure cope with the increased capacities, loads and fault levels that we placed upon them? This will require a detailed load flow and fault study. Also, you need to know whether the local grid in your area has the capacity to meet your higher demand. In many cases, it can't, and it can take years for the DNO to implement the reinforcement works. The best advice that anyone can give any business about their electrification journey is that it's never too early to start, and in reality, the earlier the better. Next slide, please. So who are Vattenfall and how can we help? We are Sweden's largest energy provider and one of Europe's largest energy companies. We've been around for over 120 years and we're owned by the Swedish state. We have operations in 6 countries in Northwest Europe, and we generate and supply over 130 terawatt hours of electricity from a growing base of renewable and climate-friendly assets. We operate a huge HV distribution estate with responsibility for over 50,000 substations and 100,000 miles of network cables, and we boast a network availability uptime of 99.992%. We are experts in high voltage infrastructure and asset management. Next slide, please. Like many in the Nordics, Vattenfall has been on its own sustainability journey for years. Vattenfall aims to be a leading business in the energy transition through electrification of climate smart solutions. The primary goal is to enable fossil-free living within one generation. This is not our sustainability strategy, it's our business strategy, and it is sustainable. Since 2014, we have increased our operational wind farm capacity from 1.5 gigawatts to 3.5 gigawatts, and we have over 3 gigawatts of new capacity currently under construction. We have also reduced our overall CO2 emissions by 17% since 2014, moving from 83 to 19 million tonnes of equivalent CO2. But we must do more. Just this week, Vattenfall have announced that it will increase its emissions reductions in line with global 1.5 degree temperature rise targets, and will reach its own net zero journey by 2040. Very few companies are doing this. Next slide, please. So, in Sweden, Vattenfall are working with leading businesses to develop and deliver zero-emission technologies to replace traditional high-emissions industrial processes. Many of these projects are groundbreaking innovations that will deliver huge environmental benefits to the world in the years to come. We only have time to touch on a few today, but I'm going to mention Hybrid Steel, which is a joint collaboration of Vattenfall, LKAB and SSAB to produce the world's first fossil-free steel manufacturing process using green hydrogen. We are already past the experimental phases and are now building a full-scale production plant in northern Sweden. In cement production, we are working with Cementa to produce climate-neutral cement using green electricity. And in biofuels, Vattenfall are working with Preem using green hydrogen to produce large-scale production. Through these collaborations, Vattenfall are making huge investments, spending the billions in striving towards our goal of a fossil-free future. Next slide, please. Since 2010, Vattenfall have invested over 3.5 million in the UK renewable generation assets and will continue to invest in its renewable generation estate, both across the UK and in Europe. The map shows Vattenfall's renewable generation assets and our development pipeline. So the light blue projects are, the light blue icons are projects that are live operational, and we've got about 1.1 gigawatts of wind, solar and battery storage in operation. And the turquoise boxes are projects that are either under construction or under development. Next slide, please. At our core, the Vattenfall networks are high voltage asset builders, owners and operators. We are uniquely positioned to offer electrification through our networks businesses. And within the UK, we have an ID&O business. We are an independent distribution network operator. And as an Ofgem regulated ID&O, we can offer a competitive alternative to a local DNO for contestable grid connection works. Generally, ID&Os are more flexible than DNOs, and we are easier to work with. Generally, we can deliver projects quicker and at a lower cost than the DNO, and we're not constrained by geography. We also pay an asset adoption fee on completion, which can make us a significant contribution towards the project. We also have a private wire network business. Here we invest in new or existing private wire electrical networks, whereby we take over the ownership and operations and take on all responsibility for the network for a defined period of time, typically 10 years, but more about that later. Next slide, please. So all energy intensive businesses will have a high voltage private wire network. Private wire networks are below the meter and are therefore not owned by or the responsibility of a DNO or an IDNO. They are normally owned by the legal entity operating the business premises. Private wire networks come in all sizes and capacities, from the very small, comprising just a single substation, 1 or 2 MVA capacity, through to the very large, 100 substations plus and potentially over 100 MVA capacity. Electricity, as we know, is the lifeblood of any business, and without it, everything stops. Therefore, quality, safety, and reliability are paramount. All electrical assets need regular safety inspections and maintenance, especially high voltage assets. Unfortunately, this aspect is all too often overlooked. Also, all electrical assets have a limited design life, which is defined by the design and materials used by the OEM. And again, this is especially true of HV assets. And again, sadly, this aspect is all too often overlooked. The bottom line is, if you do not look after and invest in your assets, they will not look after you. It's the same analogy as buying a car, never servicing it, never changing the tires or brakes, and then being surprised when it lets you down. More importantly, correct asset management and investment will ensure you discharge your legal obligations, protect your business and your employees. Unfortunately, very few businesses have the in-house skills, knowledge and experience to operate and maintain a high voltage electrical network, which makes it a burden and a distraction from their core business activities. Next slide, please. Owning a private wire network comes with mandatory legal obligations, responsibilities and liabilities. These include things like the electricity at work regulations, the supply of machinery regulations, the electrical equipment regulations, the electrical safety, quality and continuity regulations, health and safety at work regulations, multiple environmental laws and regulations, not to mention a host of technical regulations. Businesses have a duty of care to their employees, contractors, and the environment. In the event of an environmental or safety incident, the full weight of the law can be brought to bear on a business, including unlimited fines and prison sentences for both duty holders and grossly negligent employees or contractors. Keeping abreast of all of these regulations is a daunting task, so it's best to get advice. But the important thing to remember is that the buck stops with the business and its duty holders. Legal liability cannot be subcontracted. Next slide, please. So what is Power as a Service? The basic premise of Power as a Service is very simple. We work with any size business to reduce their risk and take the hassle out of owning, operating, maintaining, and upgrading high voltage private wire networks. We do this by adopting, then owning their networks and taking full responsibility for all aspects of asset management, including safety, technical, and environmental compliance. Only by adopting and owning the assets is it possible to transfer all responsibility and duty holder liability to Vattenfall. This then leaves the client free to focus on their core business activities, safe in the knowledge that they're in the hands of experienced experts. Typically, we adopt assets for an initial period of 10 years before looking to renew the contract. The owners receive an asset adoption payment, which provides a useful cash injection to their business. The amount we pay is reflective of the current day value of the asset, which is dependent on the quantity, age, and condition of assets being adopted. Where we adopt assets that are end of life, we upgrade them to ensure reliability and compliance with today's standards and regulations. Also, as your network grows to cater for future electrification, we will design and build out your network for you. We provide the CapEx for these expansion projects, leaving you free to invest in other areas of your business. We can also provide the CapEx funding for and deliver embedded generation projects for renewable energy like wind, solar, battery storage, microgrids. And we can provide all the infrastructure and upgrades necessary to meet your EV fleet charging requirements, to help your business lower its carbon emissions and to meet environmental targets. All of our services are provided for a fixed monthly fee over a 10-year term. So if an asset that we own fails, it's our responsibility to fix or replace it at our expense because we're the owners, so that makes sense. We take the risk. We provide guaranteed service levels against predefined KPIs, and at the end of the term, if the client wishes, the assets can be transferred back to him, or we can renew the agreement and go again. Next slide, please. So up until now, there have been two models for end users to follow. One is to do everything in-house, taking on all responsibilities and reliabilities. The slide shows a list of the main responsibilities and liabilities that an end user has for their electrical equipment. So the other option up until now has been that they can subcontract part of those duties to a specialist contractor, such as asset management IOM duties. Next slide, please. So what you should see now is the areas of responsibility that can be subcontracted to a third party. But as we mentioned earlier, the main liabilities and responsibilities are still going to lie with the user. Next slide, please. Under Vattenfall's Power as a Service, all responsibilities and liabilities pass to Vattenfall. And it's only by becoming the legal owners, by adopting the assets, that we are able to do this. There's no grey areas. The buck stops with us under this scenario. So Power as a Service really does relieve the end user of all legal liabilities and responsibilities. Next slide, please. When it comes to the electrification of your business, as we said, you now have a new option. You can go the traditional route of outsourcing the design and build to consultants and contractors using your own CapEx, and then taking full responsibility and legal liability for the assets yourself. Or you can now choose Power as a Service from Vattenfall, where we will take the hassle out of building, owning, and operating high voltage power electrical networks. We will provide the CapEx investment We will then own the assets and take full responsibility and legal liability, and we ensure the assets are correctly maintained and guarantee levels of service and performance. The customer enters into a 10-year contract with fixed monthly fees, which means they avoid capex fights and can lock in their OPEX costs over the term of contract. Next slide, please. Today, many businesses are converting their diesel, car, van, and bus fleets to electric. This is a great example of where power as a service comes into its own. Most businesses looking to transition to an e-fleet have several things in common. One, they have no real experience of high voltage electrical infrastructure, and they need help. Two, their existing facilities do not have enough power for their new EV fleet. Three, they are usually unaware of the new responsibilities and liabilities they will inherit when they install high power electrical infrastructure. And four, they often do not have the capex needed for the electrical upgrades. They tend to lease their EV vehicles, so it makes sense for them to pay for the electrical infrastructure for our monthly OPEX as well. So how do we go about this? Firstly, we begin by understanding the company's e-fleet requirements and what is required to meet their medium and long-term business goals. And we then translate this into electrical energy consumption. Things like how many vehicles are they going to have today and in the future? What is the range? What's the required range of the vehicle, and hence the battery capacity that's going to be on board those vehicles? What recharge times are going to be needed, and the time of day of charging that's going to be required? All of these things and many more go into the mix in determining the type of power infrastructure that's going to be required for a project like this. So we analyze the impact. So what we then do is to analyze the impact of adding EV charging onto the client's existing high and low voltage infrastructure and the current grid capacity allowance they have with their supplier. Will this need to change? Will the network configuration be able to cope with the additional loads of EV charging? Will the grid connection need upgrading or possibly new grid connections required? And even more important, is the required extra capacity needed from the grid available? So, and also we consider whether the business has the capability and the capacity on site to install solar or battery storage to reduce their grid consumption and to help lower their costs of energy consumption. Once this has all been clarified and we do a design, we will then go back to the client and present our findings. And once everything's been agreed, we'll proceed with the project. Next slide, please. So hopefully I've given you plenty to think about today. Whilst electrification will be a key enabler for a sustainable future, the role and importance of high voltage private networks is set to grow significantly. In reality though, very few businesses have the skills and experience to run these modern high-tech networks and could really do without the added burden and operational complexity. Vattenfall Power as a Service is the ideal solution to building, owning and operating high voltage networks. And with that, I will hand back to Tim, and I believe he's going to move on to Stuart next about ESCQR.
Yes, please do think of questions and think about, obviously that's the main subject, is about power as a service, and you've got a feel for what Andy's given you there. And I'll return to those points with them in the discussion. But just initially, we've got Stuart here. Is Stuart, you unmuted and around?
I am unmuted.
Brilliant. Great. Yeah, no, it was just actually questions which obviously Andy just referred to, involving responsibilities that you've got when you're running power infrastructure and electrical equipment. And does essentially, is the electrical safety and responsibilities, quality regulations and Electricity at Work Act, how does this all work together? I mean, how basically, what are the responsibilities initially for the electrical safety and quality? It's ESQCR.
ESQCR, yeah, electricity safety, quality and continuity regulations, yes. And then obviously at the top you've got the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, and then you've got
Work Act. What's so
the
that annual
it's the Health and Safety Work Act
pressures
1974. It's for all businesses, all areas of work, all premises. It covers the duties on the employer and employees as well for health and safety at work. And then under that, you've got the Electricity at Work Act regulations, which came in 1989. Came into effect in April 1990, and that covers more the electrical equipment, conductors, transformers, switchgear, overhead lines, underground cables, etc. And it covers for work on or near the equipment. So you as an owner of an electrical distribution network or substation with equipment, it's for working on that equipment, but also near. So you've got to safeguard the public as well. So if they're walking past a substation and something happened, you would still be liable. It's your responsibility for those things. There's a few exclusions. Mines have their own safety rules, etc. And then you've got, as you were saying, the electricity safety, quality and continuity regulations. That really covers generation, distribution and supply of electricity. So that's led by DEC, Department of Energy and Climate Change, and that they're more interested in the power outages and loss of supplies and security of supply. But the HSE work very closely with this, and they're interested obviously in the regard of public safety and also about incident notifications. So if you had a electrical network and you had something went wrong with it, if there was an electrical explosion, that's a RID or reportable, so you have to report it. If somebody was seriously injured or somebody died, which we don't want, then you have to report that to the HSE. They will come in and carry out a full investigation. You will have to carry out your own internal investigation and report that through to the HSE. That can lead to you, as the owner of those assets, ending up in court. If you end up in court,
what happens if you're non-compliant? What is the?
Yep. Well, if you're non-compliant, depending on the seriousness of what's happened, I mean, you have to report all electrical explosions or discharge of electricity, and you might be non-compliant because you haven't maintained the assets. And if nobody was injured, nobody was hurt, but it was reported, then you will get a notice to rectify that. If somebody was hurt or injured, the HSE can come in and they will look to prosecute. And you as a managing director of the company have got to demonstrate that you've taken all reasonably practicable steps, you've appointed competent people, you've provided all the training, you've managed your assets, you have a full asset management database, you've got all the maintenance records, etc., etc. The people that, if it was some of your employees, when you've put them to work, they haven't been tired, they haven't been working for 24 hours and then you've allowed them to carry on working. So the HSE will look at that, and then they will make a decision whether it goes to court. And if it goes to court, the rules changed 2015. Before 2015, the maximum penalty in a magistrate's court was £20,000 or imprisonment for a term of 6 months. So your company can be fined, but you as the managing director of that company can also be fined and face that. After 2015, the magistrates court now has an unlimited fine or imprisonment for 6 months. If you go to the Crown Court, it's an unlimited fine and imprisonment for 2 years.
And
so, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say. So what do they need to do to ensure compliance? What is?
There's all the rules, all the comply with the Electricity at Work Act regs, comply with the Health and Safety at Work regs, comply with, if you own electrical distribution substations or generation, comply with the electricity supply quality, electricity safety quality. I always say supply safety regs. Within there, it tells you what you have to do. If you've got a substation, it will tell you have to have it fenced off. You have to have danger of death signs, and they will specify the size of the signs, the type of sign. You must have a notice on there of who to contact in an emergency with the location of it as well. on the outside of the fence. It also tells you about the depth of cable, what protection you need to put on cables. It's got all the information you need in there to manage a distribution network.
And if that's, you know, if you're not used to managing high volume networks, what is your third party, you know, pass them on to a third party? What are the options here to delegate it, as it were?
Well, you can't delegate your responsibility when it comes to health and safety, because you are the owner of it. So if you then opted to get a maintenance company in to do that maintenance for you, to look after your network, you have to be able to demonstrate that you've carried out due diligence on the company that you've employed. I.e., you would have to audit that company. You would have to demonstrate that you've checked that that company has good training records, they employ competent people, they keep the competencies up to date, and ensure that they are fully compliant with the ESQCR regs plus the electricity at work regs as well. So you can't. Oh yeah, I've passed it down to my contractor. He's going to manage all that lot for me. No, you have to be able to demonstrate that your contractor is fit for purpose and competent to carry out that work. Which is where, when Andy was showing the slide where it was this is the responsibilities, and then it went across some of the responsibilities you could delegate, and then Vattenfall, we as a group, because we take ownership of the assets, we pay you for the assets, and they then become Vattenfall assets. The responsibility actually sits with me. So I'm the one that the HSE would be coming to for the if I wasn't able to demonstrate that we'd put all of the right measures in place, we had employed the right competent people with the right training, with the right qualifications to carry out that we've got the asset maintenance records, and we've taken all steps to follow that.
It's as simple as that then. If you don't own it, you don't have to do it. You're not responsible. So there's nothing you have to do.
Yeah, it is the owner of the assets that is responsible for it.
Yes, so it does genuinely wash your hands of that responsibility.
You're passing that across to us because we take ownership of it.
No, sounds like an interesting option, particularly with the potential penalties involved here.
Yeah. It's more about making sure the assets are safe and nobody gets injured.
Right. Just going to move swiftly on, but do stay on. And any questions regarding health and safety and Electricity at Work Act and so on, then do flag them up on the chat. But we'll just move on to actually look at an end user case study of it's Kapechka. I can't say it right. I always get it wrong, but it's actually now a lot easier word. It's Instabox, and this is Ties van Driel, well, from Instabox I call it. But they partnered with Vattenfall Network Solutions in the Netherlands and have a fully managed EV fleet via the Power as a Service. So let's have me shut up and let's hear from Ties. Right, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, and no worries for the pronunciation of the name. It's quite hard to say it right. You can also just use RGP, but maybe just a quick introduction of our company and also why Instabox is being mentioned as well. I think that's good for clarification, and then we'll go to the situation of our charging facilities where we indeed work with Vattenfall. So 6 years ago, I founded together with the two other guys, RJP, or Retje Pakketje. We're a logistics company in the Netherlands, and we deliver parcels for e-commerce. We wanted to basically rise the bar for a lot of the big players in the market. As probably all of you know, you have a few very big ones, and yeah, we wanted to do a better job. Well, we succeeded in that, and we grew really fast, double or tripled each year. And last year we found Instabox, or Instabox basically found us. They are a little bit bigger in Sweden, so a Nordics logistics company. They're heavily involved in locker deliveries. That's not a big thing in the Netherlands yet, but it's big in the Nordics, definitely. If you would ask me, it's a very smart way, a more efficient way of working. And they wanted to get basically feet on the ground in the Netherlands, and they acquired RGP. So that's why I'm currently working for Instabox. That's a little bit of the background of our business. So we're very much a scale-up companies, moving fast, doing a lot, improving the world, and doing our best, and that's going very well. Then in regard to the charging stations, we always had in our minds that we wanted to be the first to actually have a completely CO2-free, fossil-free network in the whole country. And then we're quite lucky to live in the Netherlands, since Netherlands is one of the most dense countries in the world, and we have very good highways, or maybe even the best highways in the world. You're all free to test them. And so we got the opportunity to do this, and then electric cars came up and got improved, and we got longer mileage. So we actually could take the step, instead of only being able to compensate CO2, instead of doing that, just having real EV cars. But to have EV cars, of course, you need charging facilities. So we started to look for companies who could provide us with charging stations. But then next to charging stations, you need a lot more. And we're quite good at doing logistics, but we're not very good at doing everything which has to do with charging facilities, upgrading grid connections, buying power, electricity for a good price, and everything that comes with it. And I think we almost underestimated it, and I think it's a very good introduction, which Andy and Steven just did. There's quite a lot getting into EV and charging your vehicles properly, making sure that you are compliant for all the rules that you have, that you can work safe, and that you don't really have to worry about it anymore in quite a big range. So that's the point when we found Vattenfall, and they just started at that time. I think it's a year ago, 1.5 years ago. They just started with the power as a service solution. I think we were actually one of the first customers, but I'm not really sure if that was worldwide or in Europe. But we found them.
In the Netherlands, that was.
Sorry?
That was just in the Netherlands.
Okay, just in the Netherlands. Yeah, great. So we found Vattenfall, and I think they've shown a very entrepreneurial spirit in this whole setup. They basically take out all of our, they really unburden us in the way in EV stations. We did choose for Van der Zijs as the hardware/software provider. That's because they have a very, very precise way of using load balancing for the vehicles, and we're also investing in getting our planning tool connected to our charging facilities, and that way we can always have the most optimal ranges which we need in vehicles, so that you don't need an even bigger grid connection. So I think we're very happy with the collaboration that we have with Vattenfall, and basically from grid connections up to managing every project on all currently 9 facilities have been very nice. Yeah, it worked very smooth.
What was the benefit, did you find, for upgrading your old transformers? What was why was it done? Why did you see the?
Well, if you look at our business case, we have about let's say 100 to 200 routes per let's say vehicles per facility, per sorting station, per sorting facility. So that means that you basically nowhere in the Netherlands there is enough power in the normal transformer when you rent a new hub, a new terminal. So at each terminal, if you calculate through how many miles you need to drive each day, how many kilometers, and you know how much time you have to actually charge the vehicles back again to the needed miles, then basically at all new facilities, you come down to the point that you need a bigger grid connection.
Given the fact you were expanding rapidly, and you obviously have a great demands on your time and so on as managing the company, was power as a service just a godsend, an obvious solution, or was it one of many options you were looking at the time?
I think first we actually tried to just buy the charging facilities, and then we got to know more about how it actually works and why it's a little bit more big of a deal, and that's why we almost underestimated it. But just before we did, we actually found Vattenfall, and we were like, yeah, why can we not put basically all the EV eggs in one basket, or almost one basket, and then let them handle everything that we actually do need some expertise on.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. Great. You stay on for the debate, but I'll just hand over now to Simon Concar, who's MD of Bowers Electrical. Could you tell us a little on the similar lines, but of why you chose to partner with Vattenfall and offer power as a service to your clients?
Yeah, sure. To give you a little bit of background, initially Bowers Electricals provides distribution level products, so distribution transformers, switchgear and the like, as well as services to support those. And when we were aware of Vattenfall, and I think from the information that Andy provided early on in his slides, both their history, size and knowledge of the market, there was clear correlation between what they do and what we do. So they solve a problem for us and our customers, in that we will often get clients that know they want to move forward with improving their energy efficiency by putting lower losses transformers in, for instance. We can provide the product, but the problem they have then is either getting the capex or the time frames to get it. And that's where working with Vattenfall for us fitted very well, because they, as you've heard, can offer to be the owner of that asset on behalf of our client and solve the problem with, they don't need to then wait for months to get capex approved. They can take the other option.
Most of your clients are actually interested in getting rid of the need for the capex, maybe more so than the health and safety obligations, and or is it?
Yeah, it depends on the client for us. So we deal with IDNOs, electrical contractors that deal with IDNOs, through to much smaller clients as well. So you've got different ends of the spectrum, where some people at the smaller end want to do that delegation of the health and safety and responsibility. You've got others where the drivers is that capex requirement is removed and far quicker by going through the power as a service option. So yeah, it depends on the client, depends on what they're looking for, but you've got all opportunities there to sort of resolve the issue for the client as to what any barrier is for them to make the purchase and make the decision to go to power as a service.
You referred to just a few moments ago about upgrades, say of a transformer or something, for energy efficiency purposes or sustainability. What sort of gains can you make by changing a transformer, from an old one?
Yeah, it really depends on what you're changing it from and what you're changing it to. So earlier this year, new EU regulations came in, which are referred to as Tier 2, which put more requirements for lower losses from distribution transformers. And if you were to install one of those, let's say, instead of a 1950s, 1960s distribution transformer, the savings can be very notable. If you're only replacing it with something more modern, a Tier 1 unit, obviously the differential is slightly less, but there can be considerable sums in savings, and obviously the impact environmental wise for losses, which is also a key driver at the moment as well.
No, absolutely. And was Vattenfall an obvious partner for you, in the sense that were there other options? Is it, did they, as you sort of indicated, they ticked a box that you needed? But what did
Yeah, I
you
think
find? Yeah.
Perhaps the differentiator is probably the wrong word, but again, as you saw from the earlier slide, the difference between just going to a finance house that a client could go to finance his purchase, Vattenfall do the whole picture and are experienced in electrical networks and have that knowledge and background behind them. So that's why it was a key partnership for us.
And you're finding it's that you're rolling out quite a large amount, as in there's quite a lot of interest. Obviously, it's been tough times recently with COVID and lockdowns and so on. But are you finding as an offer it's
the partnership, the relationship with Vattenfall for us is still quite new, but yeah, certainly there's a lot of interest in what they're offering, and our business development guys, when they're talking to customers, are putting it in front of people, and there's a lot of interest in finding out some more details about it.
No, thank you. So I'll welcome back all the other panelists now, and hello. And whilst people get their heads in order, and you do use the chat, as I say, ask questions or put your hand up, and we're trying to involve as many of you as possible with your questions about power as a service and how it could work. But in the meantime, I'll start with one of the first polls. So we've got just a couple of questions, and you should be able to see there on your screens, it's how do you currently manage your electrical infrastructure? So that'll be up there for a couple of minutes if you could answer that, and then I'll move on to the next one. But in the meantime, perhaps Andy Vickers or Stuart could answer. Is the power as a service, obviously, what differentiates it from just being a financial mechanism to do it like some service as a service contracts?
Hi Tim, it's Andy here. I'm actually going to refer some of these questions to another colleague, another Andy Hyndman.
Andy Hyndman, yes, great.
Give him the floor for a few moments.
Yeah, no problem. If my name's coming up, it looks like I'm a clone of Ollie, but it's Andy Hyndman working with Andy Vickers and Stuart. Yeah, it's quite often people say, is it purely a financial service? It's not financial service at all. It's a service contract over the 10 years, where we acquire the actual network and take on all the risks as the owner, and just it's basically network as a service as well. We don't supply the actual electrons going through there, but we ensure that the network is available to do that. So it's not the same as somebody lending the money to buy a piece of kit. We actually acquire the existing infrastructure, and we can also supply new if we need to expand for EV fleets or electrification in general. So yeah, it's far more and not financial service. It's an overall package that allows the client to concentrate on their core business without the risks involved as well of the electrical network. So that's the main drive, I think, is allowing people to concentrate on their business, such as Energyst Vattenfall, where they basically their business is moving boxes, so they lease their cars and they vans rather, and they would lease the network in the same way, the charging network. Okay.
It's sorry, Andy, I was just going to say it's also about being in a partnership as well, because working with the clients, it's about looking at their electrical load and giving advice, and then if they want to expand or increase or bring in a new production line, then it's working with them as what's the best way to bring that in. Do they need to upgrade the network, or can we feed it off the existing network? Or if it's a massive change, we can do all the conversations with the local DNO and work with them.
Yeah, and we can help in if they need additional generation in solar, wind, renewables, that type of thing. We're quite good at that, I think.
Yeah, I'll just draw that poll to a close, and we'll just set the next one up and get that up for you to. There we are. What are the main obstacles to expanding your electrical network due to electrifying processes, adding renewables, EVs, and all that sort of decarbonisation and heavy electrification that's happening? In the meantime, obviously net zero is one of the biggest things at the moment, and so how does Power as a Service, how does it tie in with the company's ability to, with its zero carbon and environmental objectives and targets? How can they line that and make sure that, because if you've got ownership of it, obviously you can upgrade and do efficiency and so on, but at a rate technically that you'd want to do, not that I'd want to do. So how's that tally?
That's something I touched on, I think, earlier, where we are well versed at integrating renewables into the system, which will help on the net zero journey. We would, as Stuart said, it's a partnership, so we would right from the outset work with the client to see their existing needs to meet that, but also the medium and longer term needs, and build the network accordingly. Even replacing transformers, I think Simon mentioned that earlier, low loss transformers compared to older ones will be more efficient and reduce energy use purely by updating transformers. So that's where this can help on that path, the sustainability and the decarbonisation path.
But it's on that, it's about being open with our partners, because sometimes the cost of putting that in, it's not viable for them. Therefore, we don't want to just sell them the most expensive stuff and say, oh great, we can get them. No, it's about working with them. We've had a case where a client wanted a microgrid rather than upgrading the local DNO network, and we did all of the figures, and for their benefit we got an external electrical expert to also review it, to then go back and say, actually your best bet is to upgrade the local DNO network at this time because of the cost and the payback for them. So that's about having trust and working with customers.
And we're good at Vattenfall, sort of technology agnostic, isn't it, as well? We're not here to sell equipment, it's a solution. So we're not pushing solar panels or wind farms, but if it is the best fit economically and sustainability wise, we will go for it.
With regard to resilience and so on, and disruption from power cuts and blackouts and outages, whose responsibility? How does that fit in with the Power as a Service model?
That would be with us if we were the owner of the network, and because it would be likely, it will be optimally managed and up-to-date system, that would in itself minimize the potential of interruptions. A lot of networks that we see are very old, extremely old, some of them, not really maintained properly, and waiting for a problem to happen. But if we were to review and take over or adopt somebody's network, we would ensure that would be as up to date, meet all the safety requirements, and be quite robust.
Is there anything tied into the cost of business disruption itself?
We have I don't think we build that. We sort of guarantee the availability of the network. We don't guarantee the availability of electricity, but up to a point. If the customer has, say, misoperated a machine in their factory, whatever, then we can't be held responsible for that. But we try and minimise the potential of that causing disruption by safety mechanisms.
And that would be working. Sorry, I was going to say, and that'd be working with the client and then saying, that this part of the network, how critical is it to your business? If this asset failed, it would take us 24 hours to replace it. Well, 24 hours might be for some clients acceptable, but others it'll be no way. And then we said, well, there is an alternative. We could put in a standby generator, and we'd work with them as to how they would want us to offset that risk. But again, that would come at a cost, and it's about how we share that cost. Sorry, Andy.
Yeah, so what I was going to say, which is what Stuart was touching on there, part of a contract, part of the agreement with a client is that we define the service levels, the minimum service levels that we will provide to that client in terms of site attendance, and in terms of the availability and the uptime of those assets that we are responsible for, subject to external faults.
Yeah. I'll just ask the next poll question, get that going whilst we continue. It's, do you have a clear carbon reduction / sustainability strategy for your business? Simple yes, no. I'll leave that there for a couple of minutes. You were talking there, Stuart, about risk and so on, but how does power as a service work? You know, with regard to, is it where's the risk fit in with doing it themselves and obviously handing over the risk, which still is a risk, but how does it work?
Okay, one of the first things we would do when we start talking with the client is we would look at their assets. We would do a due diligence on the assets. What's the status of the assets? How old are those assets? Have they got good maintenance records for those assets? For us to be able to put a price and a value to those assets. And if we've been on a site and they've got transformers that are 50 years old that haven't been maintained, then obviously the value we would give for that will be much lower. But what we would be saying is that is now a major risk to your business. And the problem you've got with most people think because it's never faulted and the lights have always stayed on, that won't happen. But the risk goes up much higher. The older and the less maintenance on the assets. So we would look at doing the due diligence and a report on the assets to work out the value. And part of our offer would be that we will pay X for the assets, but we're going to spend this much money in the next 2 years or 3 years to replace those assets to de-risk it for us. And that would all fit into the value of the contract that we put in place.
Right.
So it's about reducing the risk and taking that risk away from us, and obviously the risk is that the asset fails and the customer's business is down and they're losing money.
I just launched the last question, and as I do this, I'll ask another question the audience sent in. So the last poll, and thank you for doing these, is: do you know your anticipated future energy increase due to electrification as a % of your current consumption and capacity? The question to the panel is how do you ensure power quality? Hydrogen electrolyzers, wind turbines and PV can generate complex harmonics, voltage sags and spikes, and you can encounter transients including EMP. How do you manage this, and would you consider power quality as a service useful, PQAAS, in real time? Power quality issues cost 150 billion euros in the EU alone, and that is 2007 number. Yes. So, any comments on power quality?
I can take that one.
Yep.
So yeah, harmonics is a subject that's very close to our heart. We're very much aware of the potential harmonic issues arising from things like chargers, anything with inverters, chargers, PV inverters, etc. All have the potential to emit high levels of harmonics. And it's when we take over a network, one of the things we will look at and question the client is around power quality issues, and whether there's any current power quality issues on the local site, or if they've got any outstanding issues with the DNO. But when we take over a network, or if we're looking at funding a new project such as a bus garage EV electrification project, it's very important to do the G55 studies to look at the harmonic emissions, and that they comply with the, more importantly under G55, the existing background harmonics, that with the addition of with the addition of new loads on the network at the point of connection, that we don't exceed the maximum levels that we're allowed to. So it's something that we are acutely aware of, and we take a lot of we take a lot of time to ensure that we don't create power quality issues.
It's something that not a lot of people are actually aware of, or if they are, they don't think it'll be an issue. But you're quite right, Andy, that as you add more and more charges to your load, which may have been relatively small electrically, it can be an issue. And at some stage, the network operator can say, we can't take this. You know, there's limits, isn't there, to the.
It's part of the grid connection planning that you have to submit all the G5, the G99, G100, and G everything else to demonstrate that you're in accordance with the rules, regulations, and that you're not going to cause any problems to the network. Part of our obligations as an IDNO.
Here's a quick one, which I know you'll know the answer to, but what happens to the infrastructure after a 10-year lease comes to an end?
Okay, ideally, the customer will turn around and say, it's been a great 10 years, we're really happy with your service, we want to go again. So the intention is that when we adopt assets, it is for life, but every 10 years we pause, we review, and give both parties the opportunity to make that decision and hopefully agree to go for another 10.
If not, then they accept move out and they take the assets basically, but then the responsibility will be back with them as the owner. Ownership would transfer back. And
I think rented it, or they pay a subscription model and it's slightly different, but over the next, they haven't paid it off in 10 years, have they? Do they just own it for no money at the end?
Paid off the investment that we've made in, which is essentially our network for that 10 years, should have been paid off during that period.
It all depends on how much we've invested, what the value was when we bought it, and if at the end of contract, if the customer wants to take it back after 10 or 20 years, then it's purchased back from us for the current day value, according to the depreciation rules that we agree up front.
Okay. This is Vattenfall Power as a Service. Do you offer this for electricity and gas stroke H2 future changes for zero carbon?
We don't do gas.
Yeah, we don't do gas. Vattenfall as a business is looking at hydrogen, and we're doing a lot in the hydrogen space. But in the UK today, we're not rolling out mass hydrogen at the moment. It's something that will unfold over time. We have got a couple of projects going on up in Aberdeen Bay. I think we're looking to build a 20 megawatt electrolyzer, and there's a couple of similar size projects that we're looking at. But we are, as a business, we're really looking at grid scale hydrogen, 500 megawatts to a gigawatt type installations.
We keep questions coming.
Sorry, that would be
Yep.
the green hydrogen side of things, where the wind farms can provide the power for the hydrolyzers, etc. But we, like I said, we don't do gas. One of the things that we were asked when we entered the UK was, as an IDNO, will you become a independent gas network operator as well? And we're like, no, that won't allow us to achieve fossil free in a generation if we start purchasing and putting gas in.
Sure. We've got here, does power as a service include the commodity or just the delivery? Does Vattenfall become my supplier, or can I still choose who I buy the power from?
No, we don't become a supplier. You choose the energy supply. We facilitate it. We're the pipeline for the electrons to come down, but you're free to purchase the electricity supply from anybody. We do have onshore and offshore, well, soon to be offshore wind farms, which we can supply power purchase agreements for a certain level, relatively high minimum level of take. That is there, but it's not something that we push. We will say it's there, and we'll give in an offer, but free to source electricity wherever.
Maybe I would like to add there that we did choose to have Vattenfall as a power provider as well, and that has worked very nice. You have a very good portal where you can actually buy the. We do it like stock on the stock market basically, and that's working very nice. So it's a different part of the company. We're not the same people, but for us it worked easily. We have good experiment with it now.